Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at solutions to the exercises in Chapter 15 for the second exercise set. That would include these particular exercises here. And I do want to make special note, and I added it right here within the course shell, that the solutions for the even-numbered exercises do exist on the author's companion website. And I think I've mentioned that in the past, but let me just demonstrate to you where you can get to those and how you can get to those. So the companion website for our book is located here. So there's a link to it. When you get there, you'll land on this page. And the way that you get to that material is by clicking here. You do need to register using the code that's available in your book. And I actually created a separate login here for myself using my own personal email account because my school account is linked to my instructor account. So you don't want to do that. But once you've set up an account using that access code, you can come in here and you can start to look at some of the things. And one of the things, of course, is solutions. You can click that little go button there, and then it'll actually go in and give you the answers to all those even-numbered things. Apparently this is for the checkpoint questions, but we're looking for the exercise solutions. And you can download those here. So you can actually grab all the files and look at the code directly. Now, I don't want you to just jump in here and copy this code and paste it in as your own solution. But I do want you to know that it's there, and that's the reason why I'm not video recording solutions for those. Now, I am going to record solutions for the odd-numbered ones because that, I think, is handy. And I didn't record them right away, and I was reminded very quickly in the classroom that, hey, you didn't put it out there. I kind of need that support. So that's why I'm here creating this video, even though it's kind of after the fact. As long as you're learning from it, then it's valuable for me. But this is important. Now, if there's some reason you have a copy of the book where you didn't get the access code, you might find it handy as we move through the course to have that. And usually if you've rented your textbook electronically, or you bought an electronic copy, sometimes you have the option to not get that access code, in which case you don't get access to the solutions. And here's where that little extra expense might prove worthy, especially since I might not go through recording all those solutions for even-numbered ones for you. Okay, let's actually go back now to the course show. I don't want to do what I just did, and look at which ones we need to do. Now, the first one that's out there is exercise 15.9. And this one, I did walk through a solution in the classroom, and I actually have that solution available right here. And what I'm going to do, instead of building the application from scratch, is I'm actually going to pull up the file and then walk our way through it. So here is exercise 15-9. Now, it has a whole bunch of imports here, which you can see, and you can copy those if you wish. But I think what's helpful here is that we also have a description of the problem up on the screen so we can look at it. So that's what I'm doing right now. And the website I'm logging into, which is the CourseSmart website, this is actually one approach that you can use to get your textbooks, and you can read them in exactly the same way that I do. So you just set up an account, and of course, any of the books that you would get, you would just come up here, search for the ISBN or title, and you add them to your bookshelf, and then there's a price that is associated with it. But it is kind of a handy way to access your textbooks, I have to say. I do like physical copies when I'm just reading, but when you're working on code, having it up on the screen sometimes is kind of nice too. So let's go ahead and get into the book. And then I'm going to navigate to chapter 15, and we're going to be way at the end here, probably somewhere right around here. And we're looking for exercise 15-9. Oh, and apparently we're not quite there yet. So let me just navigate a little bit further. Okay, and that got us a little bit closer. So the exercise that we want to work on here is exercise 15.9 says draw lines using the arrow keys. It says write a program that draws line segments using the arrow keys. The line starts from the center of the pane and draws towards east, north, west, or south using the right, left, up, and down arrow keys on the keyboard as shown in diagram 15.2.6b. So this is kind of what we're trying to achieve here. Now, since I already have the application built, I'm actually just going to go ahead and run it so you can see what it looks like when it's working successfully. And right now you see nothing on the screen. That's because nothing was drawn, and we're controlling it using our arrow keys. But you're going to see as I start to press the keys, it starts to do this. And I'm also noticing that I didn't start in the center, but that's a tweak that you can make on your own. And it's so much fun. But you can see that once you start doing stuff like this, you're not really that far away from doing like video game like things. I mean, basically we're drawing on the screen dynamically with key presses. Very, very exciting. All right, so the way that the application begins is the first thing I did is I tried to identify, the fact that we are going to need a window to put it in, so that necessitates the stage, and then we're going to need a pane inside that stage where we can actually place our work. So I just created a new pane, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but the point of that statement is that basically we can change the focus of where we are relative to our location. And I know that sounds a little vague, but that is basically what it does. But what we need to do is set up all the components first that you know you're going to need. So usually what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll declare all the basic structures of the program. So I'll start by creating a start method because we know we need the stage, and I'll go ahead and I'll create a pane. And then really the next thing I'll do is I'll go down and put in the other stuff, and that is set up a place where everything can appear. So very often I'll just create those two things first, and I might even just run the program at that point just to make sure that everything's coming up correctly. Now, in order to actually draw the lines on the screen, I first need to set some parameters. Now, I know that by pressing a key, I need to respond. And if you look back at some of the other sample applications in the chapter, you should be able to get most of this code directly from there. So we are taking that pane that we set up, and we're saying that on key press, we are going to trigger our Lambda event handler. And then we're just going to set a conditional statement. And I chose to do else if for these, but you could have just as easily done a switch statement or just a series of regular ifs. So those work as well. And then every time that key is pressed, we take that code, the key code that was pressed, and we're trying to see if it is equivalent to the key code for the up arrow key. And the way that you express that, as was demonstrated in the readings in the chapter, was by doing this. So we get that code, we check to see if it's up. If it is up, then we're going to go back to the pane, we're going to get children and add a new line. And I could split this up over several different lines of code, but I decided to just do it all in one fell swoop. And then that new line has a few different parameters. And notice that as I hover over that word, it says we have a starting X and a starting Y and an ending X and an ending Y. Now, given the fact that we need to have a starting point, well, how do we know what the starting point is? Let's ask that question first. Well, that depends, right? Because we really don't know. And really, we want to have our program set up so that whatever X and Y is something relative to where we were. Where we were has to be declared. And to start the program, you might want to actually set some variables that would hold that value. So in this case, I'm setting up an x and a y, and it shows a starting point of 100 and 100. And really, it should be in the center of that pane. And one place where you can specify the center of the pane is by, well, I guess you have to know what the parameters of the pane are first. So if I really wanted to put it in the middle, and I suppose I can do that, 400 for x. So the middle of that would be 200, and the other one was 250. And the middle of that would be 125. So that would be one way that you can declare the center. I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, so if we start the program at that position, the x and the y are already given. Now, if we're going to be moving up, so in other words, if we're going to be changing our y location, I'm going to run the program again just so we have a reference point on the screen, and I'll just up arrow a little bit. So if I'm hitting the up key, the x-axis goes across, so the x is not going to change. So the ending point for the x, if I hit up, is going to be x, right where we're at. However, the y is going to decrease by 10. Now, that seems opposite what it should be, but remember that the 0, 0 point is here. So if I'm at this point in the y perspective and I want to go up, I actually have to subtract. And I chose an increment of 10 pixels. You could make it whatever you want, just to see how it responds. But the way that the program is currently set up, it increases 10 pixels each time. Okay, and you might make a smaller increment or larger. That's up to you. All right. Okay, so let's say at that point, we've made the move, and then we need to also make sure that the y position is now reset. So when this is done, we're going to subtract y from there so that the next maneuver will have the correct y starting position. And that should make sense to you, I hope. Now, of course, if we go down, same basic approach, except this time we're adding to y. If we go left, that would be this way. As you remember, 0 is here. We'll subtract 10 from x. And if we're going right, we're going to add 10. And really, it's just that simple. Once you get that logic for the first one, everything else kind of falls into place pretty quickly. All right. Now, I am actually also turning this on here, which is right at the bottom of the start method. And what this is doing is after everything loads up, at the very bottom, it will say request focus. So in other words, the pane itself is requesting focus onto itself so that it can react to the key press. Otherwise, where's the key press going to go? And then that kind of brings us back to this, that the pane itself is going to allow us to maneuver within it and set those focuses locally to that pane. That's basically the whole program. It seems almost too simple, but that's all it takes to make it work. So that is exercise 15-9. And once again, a little demonstration of it running now that I have it actually going from the center, but that's pretty easy. And that's just a whole lot of fun. All right, so that's the first exercise. Let's see which one is next. And actually, we'll get that out of the unit. Now, remember, the even numbered one is available from the website. I do want to also make note that whenever you see these, this is a video note, and that's also accessible from the author's website. And the way that you get those is you come up here and you choose video notes. And it goes by chapter. So for chapter 15, you have these, and it tells us the name of it somewhere in the book there. It's called Check Mouse Point Location. So that would be this one here. And you can go ahead and watch it. I'm not going to bring it up on the screen because I figure you can do that yourself, but he goes through and he walks through that. Now, that is not one of our exercises, and it's also important to note that those video notes exist throughout the chapter too, and you can access them just the same way. Sometimes it's nice to just watch how the author does it because, first of all, he's got an Australian accent, which is interesting in itself. But explaining his rationale and little tips and tricks as to what his workflow is compared to the way I think. Also saying that sometimes I might solve the problem differently than he does, and it does not mean that it won't work. It's just a slightly different approach, slightly different logic, slightly different syntax. Okay, so this particular one is about moving a rectangle around using a mouse. And what I'm going to do with this one in terms of the solution is I'm actually going to go find the code. I'm not going to actually type this one up because I don't want to waste that amount of time. And what I'm trying to do here is get into my exercise solutions. Yes, I have all the answers, even and odd numbered ones. So we'll find chapter 15 here. We'll pull up exercise 18, which is right here. And what I'm going to do here is I wouldn't normally do this, but I'm going to actually copy in this and drop it into Notepad++ first, and then come in here and actually create a new project. And we'll just call it exercise 18. I'm not sure why it's not liking that too much. Oh, because I've already done it. Well, never mind. It says right there in writing. So I don't have to bring up the code, but I have it right here. So let's take a look at this one. And notice, once again, all the different libraries that are in play. You need to pause the video for a second and type that out. And let's go back again to the book. Displays a rectangle. You point the mouse inside the rectangle and drag, i.e. move the mouse with the mouse pressed, and wherever the mouse goes, that becomes the center of the rectangle. Now, we played with that a little bit in class and discovered a few little nuances that might trip you up a little bit, but this is what we came up with. Now, once again, notice hardly any code to get this done. Part of that is thanks to the Lambda event handler expressions, which really trim down all the syntax we need to use, but also because really it is that simple of a program. Now, the way that I always like to proceed with these is, once again, build all the basic components. I know I'm going to need a main method with a launch, so I may as well put that in right away. I know I'm going to need a scene and a stage, and I need to set the title and the scene and make it show. Okay, so that code's already there. And then, of course, we need to also have a place to put everything. And in this case, it also makes sense to just use one single pane because we're going to have that rectangle in there. We're just going to grab it and move it around. And then we actually need to go in and declare that rectangle object. So we're going to need to pull in a new instance of rectangle, and we're giving it some parameters. And I'm just going to hover here so you can see what those are. So we're going to set an X and a Y, and we're also going to set a width and a height. So we have a starting position, and we have the size and shape. Okay, and really that starting position is one of the little tricks here, because in order to know where we are on the screen and click and drag, that's relative to what we're doing. All right, so we're also going to set up some colors for the shape, and you can put in whatever you want, because otherwise, how are you going to see it? And that's pretty important. And then we're going to throw in our event handler, and notice what we are going to react to here is the set on mouse dragged event handler. And we throw in a little lambda thing there, and then we throw in an if. And the if says, rectangle contains get x, get y. So in other words, if we have the x and the y, and how do we get the x and the y? Well, we get them, okay? And then we are setting up some parameters. If the rectangle contains then we are going to set X and Y to a new location. Now, the way that we do that is by setting up this get again. So we're going to get the current location, and then we're going to subtract 80 and then divide by 2. Now, the question is, why do we do the subtract 80 and the divide by 2? And that is so that we can make sure that we're landing inside the object as we're working. So, for example, if the width of the object is 80 and we divide by 2, that becomes 40. And then we subtract that from the X in order to get the correct positioning. Now, if you want to experiment without doing that, please feel free to remove that divide by 2 and you'll see what happens with it. And that is when you click on something, all of a sudden your mouse pointer will click from the middle of the box up to the corner of the box. And that's what we did in class to help solve that problem. All right. Finally, once you have this mouse drag event handler in place that deals with both the X and the Y, that's really it. There's no other work to do aside from actually taking that pane and adding the rectangle to the pane. All right, let's go ahead and run that and see how it goes. So now you can say click. I can drag, move it around. Some pretty exciting stuff. Now what was happening without that divide by 2 is every time we would click on it, and you can hear a mouse click, right? The pointer would go from being in the center here, which is in the middle of the object, roughly, to the corner. And that was like click, and then all of a sudden your mouse is up here, which is kind of odd. So that's why we did that. But that's an example of 15-18 working, and good luck with yours. All right, let's move on to the next exercise. The next exercise is 15-27. Now, it looks like I've already completed that one as well. And I'm assuming I completed it. I think I would remember, but sometimes that's not the case. So let's bring up 1527 here. I'm just going to give it a double click. And let's read the problem description before we proceed. All right, so we're going to jump back over to the book here. And 1527. Oh yeah, this is a fun one. Okay, so this one says control and moving text. I'm not sure that you need the word in there, but whatever. So it says write a program that displays a moving text as shown in this figure here. So what's going to happen is you have some text and it's going to move across the screen, and as it moves across the screen, it's going to pop out on the other side. Okay, seems easy enough. And then the text moves from left to right circularly. When it disappears on the right, I would think, it reappears from the left. The text freezes when the mouse is pressed and moves again when the button is released. So we got a few different things that are happening there. All right, so let's try that out. In the code, once again, I'm going to start with all the basic structures. Make sure our main method is there. Make sure we can show the scene. And then we also want to set up a pane, just as we have done. We don't need a lot of little grid panes or horizontal boxes. Just one pane will do it. Then we also want to set up some text, and that's why I have this here. And you can see we're having fun in class. All right, so now once we have the pane and we have the text, we can actually take the text and throw it into the pane. And then we're going to work with some of the animation techniques. And you can see, once again, code is super, super simple. It's just a matter of choosing the right thing to do. So we start by declaring a new instance of path transition. We're calling it PT. And it's a new one. And then we're throwing in a parameter here of actually a couple of them. And let's actually hover and see what the possibilities are here. With a path transition, you have to have duration. You need to have a shape for the path, and you need to have a node. Okay, so let's keep those in mind. So the duration is going to be indicated in this fashion. So we say duration.millis. Remember, millis stands for milliseconds. Milliseconds refer to thousands of a second. So when I say 3,000 milliseconds, it's equivalent to 3 seconds. The next thing is we need the shape that the path transition is going to follow, and that's just going to be a line. And then if you hover over a line, it's going to tell you that the 4 parameters there are the starting position for x and y, so that's minus 60 and 300, and then the ending position for x and y. Now, you're going to wonder, why did I choose these particular numbers? Well, we set up a pane to be the size of 600 by 600, so basically square. And by starting at minus 60 for an x, we are going to ensure that we're starting off the screen. And then by having a ending position of 660 for x, that's going to ensure that we're off the screen. And of course, that implies that the width of the text that we chose is about 60 pixels. And we just actually made guesses until we got it about right. Notice that the y position is never going to change. We're just going to stay right in the middle. So if the thing is 600 tall on the y-axis, 300 is going to put it right in the middle of that box. Finally, the node parameter here is going to be the text. So we're going to run for 3 seconds. We're going to move across this line from this point to that point. And what are we moving? We're moving the text. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to apply this little method here, which is set cycle count. And how long is that going to go? It's going to just keep going. And then also we need to tell it to start. So it's going to run the program. It's going to set up the transition. It's going to run indefinitely. And okay, let's do it. All right. Finally, we also want to put in a way to make sure that it stops. And that's actually pretty simple. So we're going to take our text. We're going to apply the method of set on mouth press. So when we press the key, it's going to do what? It's going to execute the event handler that will make it pause. And if we release the mouse key, then it's going to trigger the event handler to make it play again, which is what our target is. All right, so that's the code. It's all pretty simple, really. Let's hit the play button and see how it behaves. And yeah, it's going fairly quick across the screen, and it's not very exciting. And really, if you want to go in there and you can style it, feel free. Don't have to make it this tall. Don't have to make it this shape. You can do all text stuff you want with it. But if you get this working, that's great. Now, one person noticed in class that it seems like when it gets to the edge that it kind of slows down. And you know, whether or not that's an optical illusion, I'm not really quite sure. But it's also possible that by default, the transition tool in Java has what they call easing built into it. So as it begins or reaches the end of its cycle, it actually has a little kind of like a taper to the speed. And I'm not really sure about that. I guess I could look it up and tell you for sure. But that, in essence, is exercise 15-27. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one is 15-28. Once again, this is a solution provided by the author, and I'm trying to see if I might happen to have that one open here, and I do not. So I am going to go locate that code. So that is going to be in my folder here. And once again, I'm going to buffer it in using Notepad++. Just it's kind of like a safety thing, really. All right, so I copied that all, and let's go to the book, read the description, and proceed with the code. Now, this is one that I know has given people a little bit of difficulty because you told me, and that's why the reason it being difficult is one of the reasons why I put it in there as one that already has a solution. So if you have access to the solution code, wonderful. Then you also have access to this video where he demonstrates the building of the application. But I'm going to actually just bring that code up here and we're going to go ahead and create a new project. And this time we won't get the error message that it already exists, right? Exercise 15-28. And let's go ahead and click finish. And now that we're inside there, I'm going to right click and create a new class. We're going to use the default package. Let's name it exercise 1528. We'll throw in a main method, click finish, and there it is. Now, since I already have all the code, I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Oops, except I messed that all up, didn't I? All right, so let's copy all that again and paste. And hopefully everything pasted in okay with no underlines. And you're lucky because that is the case. Now, take a quick look at all the little libraries that we're using. Pause if you need to type them in. And then let's scroll down to the main part of the code. Then, once again, the approach that I would use to get this work done is to build it in pieces. I always like to go through and create all the stuff I know is going to be there anyhow. So I would add this in. I would throw in the override. I would create the public void start method with the stage. I would throw in the part where we create the scene and the stage and show it. I would also type in this little bit here to get the main method to launch. But notice that we have a lot of extra little things going on here. And some of this you will be able to pull from the readings in the book, and some of it will take a little bit of extrapolation on your part. But what we do need to do is keep in mind what the target is here. So one of the things is that we have this shape, right? And then we also have these shapes inside the circle, and we assume that these are the ones that are going to be spinning. Now, pretty clearly, we can probably set up a pane here to hold all of that, but then we're also going to need some sort of an object or a node to hold the buttons, because that's part of it. So since we're working on a graphical level, we know what we want it to do, but it's not a bad idea to start by getting all the interface stuff or all the visible elements up onto the screen. So that's a good starting point. All right, let's jump in there then and do exactly that. Now, whether you're aware of it or not, there is this thing called a fan pane, and that is discussed in the chapter. It's a special pane for doing kind of what we're about to do. So having that bit of knowledge, of course, is useful. But let's say we ignore that piece for right now. What I might do as a coder is, creating those big, large areas that we need on the screen, which is these two. So one, we are going to need the H box, and that's going to be where we're going to put our buttons. So since we're already creating the H box, we give it a name. We can come in, declare it, create the 3 buttons that we need, put the titles on them. Simple enough. We set the alignment so that they sit in the center. Not necessarily an obligation, but why not? Looks good. And then we do our get children add all to take those 3 buttons and drop them into the H box. So that's all this code. The next thing that we want to do is we want to actually set up a border pane. And the border pane, remember, is going to be something that encapsulates everything inside the window. And that means that, okay, well, we're obviously going to throw the H box in there at the bottom, because that's what we need to do. But in the center, we need to put the spot where we're going to hold our spinning fan. And now that's the spot where you might be getting stuck in terms of like, oh, how do I do that? And if you didn't read the chapter and try the examples, you will have missed the part where that is present. So you do need to use this thing called a fan pane, and that's all we really need to say with it is fan pane, fan equals new pane, the fan pane, and then put it here. So that is just taking care of all the visual elements that's going to be on the screen. And of course, you're going to say, well, is that all there is to getting that fan out there? Well, just hang tight. We'll show you how that goes. And underneath where we have our stage stuff, so where we show our scene and our stage, that's where we're going to put in our animation components and our event handlers. Part of those event handlers will be to set actions relative to the button presses. Now, notice that these button presses are going to trigger animation pause, animation play, and fan reverse. Now, because the fan is a pre-created item, it gives us that capability, but notice fan is going to be relative to the fan, or the fan pane, if I'm saying that backwards. All right. And then animation is going to be relative to this timeline animation that we created. Remember, timeline is the class that's going to let us create the instance of the animation. The timeline itself has some different parameters here, and those are related to the keyframes. Now, the keyframes are things that I discussed very briefly in the lecture video, but in essence, keyframes are points in time at which certain events will be triggered. Okay, so as part of that timeline, then, right within those parameter declarations, we create new keyframes right there on the spot, and then we set it up so that it runs based on certain milliseconds. Now, 100 milliseconds is 1/10 of a second. So every 10th of a second, the fan is going to move, and that'll be barely perceptible. But really, there's actually going to be a jaggedness, but given the fact that it's going to be like 10 times a second, it's going to be moving. It won't look quite so jagged. And then the other part there is that we're going to trigger the event handler to move the fan. Okay, how many times is that going to cycle? It's going to go indefinitely. And of course, once again, we're going to make it play as we load the program. So the scene needs to be set first, right, before we can make it play. So that's why this timeline stuff is below this. So we set up all the things that we're going to show, then we show them, and then we make them do something. That's the procedure there. Now, in terms of what the size and shape of the screen are, or the scene, that's kind of predetermined here. So we're actually setting up a parameter of 200 by 200 in advance. So then that's why we can go ahead and say the scene, whatever the width is, we're going to add a listener that's going to look for the width being set. So what that's set to is going to be relative to whatever the pane size is. Now, we do need to know what that pane size is, and the reason we know what that is this class that we've created. So when I was referring to this pre-existing object, well, is that part of a library? No, it's not part of a library. It is something that we are creating. So we're coming down here to this class, and notice that's below the main method. It is outside of the start method, and you can do that. You can create a class right inside of another class file. That is okay. You could also make it a separate file if you wish. That's up to you, but why not just throw it right in here? All right, so we create this new object now called a pane pan. And notice that it extends pane. So we are pulling from all the capabilities of the pane class. We are setting up width and height. And I think it's kind of interesting that he chooses to use doubles for those as opposed to using hard-coded values, but he must have his reasons. I would use integers, but whatever. He's also setting up a variable for radius. And notice how he's doing that. He's taking the width and the height, and he's multiplying times 0.45. Now, there's a reason he's multiplying against 0.45 as opposed to, let's say, the 0.5, which would be, you would think it's like halfway across the width, right? But he's also taking into accommodation that he doesn't want that to actually touch the circle that it's going to sit within. So that's why it's a little bit less. He's also setting up an arc. It's going to be a new arc, and notice it's got 4 inside that, and that's going to be important for working with these components because there is a little bit of an arc here. It's not a straight unit. I suppose you can make it straight if you want. He's got a starting angle. I think you just arbitrarily pick 30. It could be 0. It could be 180. Whatever you want it to be. It doesn't matter too much. He also sets up the circle in which we're going to place that fan pane, and that, of course, the circle requires both the center positions, and the center positions are going to be half of what the width and the height are. And then the radius, of course, is going to be the full radius instead of that slightly less than a radius. He also goes through now and he sets up that fan pane, and he sets up the circle, and he adds a circle to it. And then he goes through and he does a little bit of a complicated approach here by virtue of using a loop. And notice that this loop is going to run 4 times. He starts at 0, so he's going to count 0, 1, 2, 3 to go through 4 times. And then what he's going to do is he's going to use this loop to basically create the structure of the fan. That's the whole point of this. Now, he could mechanically go through and set up this structure and just spell it out 4 times. And you might choose to do that. And then you can choose whatever colors you want. But he's creating this arc, and the parameters for arc are as follows. So you got a center X and Y, a radius X and Y, because remember an arc can have radiuses in 2 different directions. And then he's got a start angle and a length. And he puts in all these various values, and obviously these are numbers that he played with for a while until he got to the point where he got the right thing. So this is a part that might have confused you a little bit, but once again, if you look back to the stuff that was in the chapter, there were examples there that you could have pulled from. All right, so once he creates all those different arcs and fills them and sets the archetype of round, then he takes all those and he adds them to the fan pane. Now he also goes through and he sets up a couple of other things, which is like the increment and the reverse. And notice that the increment here is going to be 5, meaning 5 pixels ultimately. So every time the thing moves, we're going to take whatever our start angle is, and I'm sorry, that's not going to be pixels, but degrees. So he's going to move it 5 degrees with each increment every time we do a move. If it's set to reverse, he's just going to invert the increment amount. So that's kind of logical. Now, to set the start angle, we just take that value of angle and set it, and we set the values. And then those set values, that's a separate method where he goes through and he runs these. Now remember, once again, some of this stuff is in the chapter, and that's really why I'm kind of glossing over it pretty quickly. But every time he does that, every time he sets the values, he goes through and they run this loop here to make sure that it all changes. We also have a little set for the width and the height, and that's going to be relative to itself. And once again, those values will come back here and reset. So that's the whole thing there. Let's go ahead and execute the program and see how it operates. And there it is spinning. And it looks like that 200 by 200 is a little bit small, of course. Fortunately, because it's actually a Windows program here, we can have it pause, resume, reverse, and it remembers where it was at. And I don't know if you're noticing now that the movement is a little jagged. So if you actually wanted to make it a little less jagged, you could change that increment amount. But this is enough to show it. And you know, one thing you want to do is if you really want to play with this and kind of learn how it all behaves, like, you know, if you want to change the increment to 1, you can do that. So the movement will move 1 degree at a time, and it just moves slower because it's cycling through at a certain interval, and then that interval, of course, is controlled by wherever we have the milliseconds. You know, so you could change that to something less. So that's something you can play with and make it do different things. I know this one's a little bit complicated, but once again, solution is provided uh, now by myself as well as the author. So hopefully that was enlightening for you and you picked up a thing or two. Let's now jump back and see if we can get that last one done. And the last one is 15-.29, and that is not one I completed here. So let's go ahead and do that one. Once again, I'm going to pull up an already completed solution and walk you through it. So there's all the code for it. So I'm going to copy all that. And this is kind of a fun one, or at least I think it's fun. And let's go here. So it's racing car. Write a program that simulates a racing car as shown in figure 1534A. And that's on the next page here. So like this. And the car moves from left to right. When it hits the right end, it restarts from the left and continues the same process. Now, you should recognize right away that this is not too dissimilar from this. So there's some techniques that we're going to be able to borrow from here. It says you can use a timer to control the animation and redraw the car with new base coordinates as shown in figure 1534B. And that is this one. So what they're showing you here is that you can actually create the car shape with these coordinates. So wherever you are located at the current moment, and that's a hint, you can then adjust that X and Y position relative to those spots to keep that shape of the car in place and consistent. That's what that is referring to, if you're wondering. All right. And then you can also let the user pause and resume the animation with the button release and decrease the car speed by pressing the up and down arrow keys. A lot of different things going on here. Let's go ahead, copy this code now, come back over to Eclipse, create a new project. And it's not what I typed, but there we go. And we'll call this exercise 15-29 or underscore 29. Copy that. And let's finish. Let's go in here then and let's create a new class. Make a main method. Although since I'm going to copy and paste all my code, I suppose I can just kind of omit that. But habits die hard, I suppose. All right, so here's all of our code for this. And I'm going to scroll up. You can, of course, copy at will. And I just want to make sure that I name this correctly, and I didn't. It looks like I exercises 1529, so I'll just change that to match. Let's save. So what I'll do is I'll incrementally scroll here. So I'll put this up on the screen for you. Scrolling again. Notice the use of class at the bottom. And that's the entirety of the code. So hopefully you were crafty and typed it all in. All right, so let's begin with the logic here. Now, once again, we're going to create our own custom pane where the car is going to sit. We are going to take that and place it into our scene. Okay, so that's the first two things that's going to happen in the program. If the program's going to launch, we're going to create our car pane. The class is down below. We're going to go to that in just a moment. Then we're going to run our animation, set up our event handlers, and notice how some of this stuff is very similar to the things that we did before. But let's go to the car pane now and do the work to create it. Now, the whole thing is based once again on width and height, and then we have what he's calling base x and base y, and notice that these are going to be relative. So the base x is going to be 0 because the car is going to be at the bottom of the pane in which it's sitting. So it's going to be at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so that's why um, we're doing that. So we're not going to be changing that relative to the positioning. And then h is going to be relative to the height here of 200. Now, if you take a look, you'll see that here private circle C1 and C2 are new circles, and then we are using the base X. And remember that with a circle, we need the center position of X and Y, and then the radius. So 5 is going to be our radius, but the center position is going to be whatever our base is. So if we're starting at 0, then that is going to, we're going to add 10 to it, and we're going to add 5 to it, so 15. And then we're going to do the same, subtracting those positions and then the radius, and that's going to help us define the parameters. So these are basically the tires. Okay. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the rectangle, which is the car body. I don't think I need to explain that too much. And then a polygon that's going to show all the different points that are going to be enumerated. So this is the square, these are the two circles, and then here's the polygon. All right. And you can alter that shape if you wish. I actually would be fine if you created maybe even a second rectangle up top, whatever. It doesn't, that's not really the critical part here. All right. Now, we will then create a method called car pane inside of here, where we're going to take each portions of those and fill them with colors, and then take all of those things that we created, the two circles, the car body, and the top, and we're going to add them to this. Now, this, of course, is the pane in which we're working, and that's what the reference is there. Now, in terms of moving the object, we're going to check and see if that base x is greater than w. So if we exceed that value, we are going to subtract 20, and keep in mind that means, it's going to indicate direction in this case. Otherwise, we're going to add 1, and then we're going to set the values. Now, set values is going to take those objects, and notice that we're going to have to move the circles, we have to move the car body, and we have to move the top. And those are all going to be based upon whatever the base location is, plus these parameters. And notice that these will be corresponding to the values that we have above. And some of those are also relative to what we have here. So when you see these plus 20s and plus 40s, that's what they're referring to. All right. Then once you have that in place, you can also take a look really quick at the set W and set H and how those are being used. And then those will also refer back up. Now, some of that is probably the hardest part of these exercises, and I do making the assumption that you can find a way to work through it. Otherwise, here you are looking at this video hoping for the solution, which I'm now providing for you. All right, so once we have those components in place, we come back and we do that animation, which we talked about. We also are going to add event listeners that are going to respond to the width property that we've set, and then that's going to call these other objects. And then we are going to be looking for both the mouse press and release to pause and play as directed. And then we're going to do something that we did similarly just a little while ago, and that is to look for the key press for the up and down arrow. And then that's going to allow us to change the rate of the animation by a little bit. Okay? And then also, please notice that we also have the request focus in here so that the car itself is going to be able to receive that focus. So that is indicated here. That's really all the code, folks. Let's launch it and watch the exciting results. And then remember, if I press, it pauses. If I release, it goes. If I want to change the speed of the animation, I'm hitting up arrow now, or now I'm hitting down arrow. And what I'm hoping that you see here, once again, is that we're writing these little programs, and little by little, we're learning all these different maneuvers. And for the most part, they really don't take a lot of code. And we're able to do a lot of things. They're kind of pushing us a little bit more and more towards like being able to do gaming things, interactive screen things. So very cool and very fun. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is the last of the exercises we have to worry about. Indeed it is. So that is the solution for all of the exercises for Chapter 15, the Part 2 version of them. All right, that caps this video, and good luck on finishing your work. When you're done with this, make sure you move on to Chapter 16, because that will be equally as challenging. See you there.